It's June 2022 and it's a blistering summer over the US and Canada, and it's a special time of year. All over the country, kids are celebrating as they graduate from their final year of school. Among them are two boys from California and Alberta, Canada. These two kids, even though they are thousands of kilometers apart and have never met, have more in common than just graduation. In fact, their story is mixed up in fraud, scandal, and even a far-right extremist group. Join me as I expose Rocket League's worst org, Clovarity Esports. The story of Clovarity Esports is one that is centered around two boys in Tegan and Logan, and on the face of it, they don't seem like the kind of people who would be involved in scandal and fraud. But of course, looks can be deceiving. And believe it or not, these two boys live a double life. A life in the world of esports. Welcome to the world of competitive gaming, where people compete for millions of dollars in front of crowds and audiences that rival real life sports. For organizations, there is massive money to be made in this scene, which has made it extremely competitive, but it also has its risks.
Anybody with a phone can start an esports organization. There's no barrier. You go into something and you don't necessarily know who those people are because it's the internet. It's a persona on your phone and it's a person you've never met and they've got an anime character for their logo. Like, there's no authority there, right? There's no trust. So whatever you do in this scene, you're kind of taking a risk at all times.
And it's this anonymous risk which makes working in esports so difficult. This is why most people in esports start out in small communities, where they get to know and trust people. One such community was owned by a person known as Mapo, who owned a Discord community of over 1,600 people. But by early January 2023, he found himself with less and less time to run the community, and was looking for someone to take it over. He would get a message from someone known as Castle, and Castle is one of our graduates in Tegan. In this world, he had one purpose, and that was to create an esports organization known as Clovarity. He would pitch this idea to Mapo, and after a day, he would hand over the Discord server and Clovarity was born. Initially, Clovarity was very small and only had 5 staff members, all of which were volunteering. Most notable of these was Maverick, their content director, as well as Mapo, who had decided to stay on and help Castle out in general. These 5 staff would slowly get to know Castle as a person a bit more, and it was obvious from the get-go that he was very good at the financial side of running an org.
The initial vibes were great. I loved it. I was so happy to be a part of it. Castle was really good at the financials, budgeting. He had everything that we were bringing in. He was so in tune and in depth with everything that it seemed like it was going to go somewhere really good.
In fact, in the first 8 months of running the org, Clovarity would remarkably turn up a profit, which is almost unheard of in smaller esports orgs. But when it came to anything outside of this, such as esports, content, marketing, he was a little bit clueless.
Yeah, he had some ideas. They weren't great.
Because of this, Castle would confide in a lot of people, most notably Maverick and Terra. And sometimes he'd listen, but as you'll see later, a lot of the time he didn't. But he had other issues too.
Castle was not very good with valuing creatives like graphic designers, editors, thumbnail guys. He did not see why they cost so much.
An early example of this is when Clovarity was hosting a tournament and Castle was reluctant to pay 2 casters. Mapo and him would get into an argument, and in the end Mapo would pay them $25 each out of pocket.
There wasn't a willingness from Castle to put as much money into staff, I think, because he felt like he could do a lot himself, which I did not agree with.
As you can tell, Castle was very much still learning, his ambition making him want to be a part of everything that went on in Clovarity, and this made some of the staff question why they were even there.
It was weird because I didn't know why I was there, but there was nothing to do. That was the issue. There was just nothing to do. They just didn't know what Clovarity was. Clovarity, my biggest issue with them when I was there is that there's no point to what they were. They didn't have a pro team when I was there. All they did was the weekly tournaments, but they didn't want to be tournament organizers. It just felt very strange.
The very few things that were actually done at Clovarity during this time were largely just staff deciding they should probably do this. For example, Maverick would build their entire content creator program, even getting in their first content creator in Party Time Dan, while Terra would recruit the team of Realize, Ian and Gar. At one point there was also talks with Deleted XD for a massive partnership deal, but these plans would never be realised because both the owner of Deleted XD and Castle would go away midway through the talks.
So like that didn't go through. It wasn't great, obviously, and that kind of pissed me off, but it was also like, all right, I roll with it.
This in many ways sums up Clovarity at the time. When Castle was there, things would go brilliantly, but for the things he didn't know or he wasn't there for, nothing would really happen.
Just staying up late and doing these damn casts every Thursday and Tuesday was just draining. It was like, why am I doing this? I'm saving them money. It was just why, like this is not what I wanted to do. I could do this on my own.
This is why many of the few staff that they had would leave in September and October, and Clovarity was in desperate need of a lifeline. Castle knew this, and on October 4th, 2023, without knowing it, he set in motion one of the most controversial sequence of events in Rocket League history. Castle would reach out to a fellow org owner in GAD, who is the second of our graduates. At the time, he was the owner of an org that was in many ways similar to Clovarity, in Spate Esports. It was very much a passion project of GAD's, and as you can see, it wasn't all that serious.
Yo, what is going on, guys? My name is Gad, the owner of Spate Esports. Oh my god, yes, daddy! Yes, queen! I can hear it through your fucking mic, world.
You can see Gad is very much the antithesis of Castle, great with people, esports, and generally seen as a great friendly guy. Gad, however, wasn't good at finances, budgeting, contracts, the behind the scenes stuff. So when he found Clovarity and saw Castle's motivation and financial expertise, he was seriously impressed. So impressed that the two would negotiate a massive deal. The deal would be for Gad to merge his own organisation into the Clovarity name, combining their staff, teams, money, everything under the one banner, in exchange for partial ownership.
And then Castle approached me, which is the other owner of Clovarity, about merging with Clovarity, just because it's really hard to find motivated and like determined people in the space. And when your org starts getting out there, it's really hard to do it by yourself. So we just thought it'd be like a good idea to kind of merge and join forces so that we have more staff behind us, and it's gonna like relieve a lot of stress and like pressure.
Along with all this, Gad would bring the promise of $160,000 a year from a mystery investor, who would get 20% of the company. This deal involved serious money. Just to give you an idea of the scale of this, Clovarity at its peak only had $1,300 to spend, but now Castle was looking at a deal almost 10 times in size. Both him and Gad could sense the opportunity, and on October 4th, 2023, Clovarity and Spate would merge. The merge was a very busy time for Clovarity. All of a sudden, two orgs, all their staff, teams, and old habits would collide. And initially, there was a good feeling in the org.
I was really excited for it.
They were initially just very positive.
We were all just on the same page and really excited for the future.
The first challenge for Castle and Gad was to figure out a simple org structure, who'd be in charge of what they do, basically how everything would work. As we know, Carson was brilliant at the finances, and so he'd be put in charge of that. Gad would gravitate more towards the esports side, as well as the day-to-day duties of running an org. This worked in a way where Gad would be the one interacting directly with people more, and reporting to Castle for financial approval. This is a dynamic that becomes very important to how Clovarity is run, as you'll see later on. These two would of course have to report to the investor, who I can reveal is someone known as Akuma. Akuma is a lover of esports. He's a proud Carmine Corp Ultra and attends almost every single LAN. This love for esports has led to him investing in many orgs in the Rocket League scene. A notable one is Lotus Esports, which is a controversial org which I'll save for another video. Another one is Valiant, which is actually initially how we met Gad, and of course finally now Clovarity. So how has a 13-year-old gotten all of this money? Well, I can say that the money isn't actually his. I won't say how he has access to it, but it's safe to say he only really uses it for esports, as well as his highly valuable in-game item collection, which he prides himself on. All this kind of makes him seem like a child, which is what many would observe at the time.
He was like To me, a 13-year-old child, everyone that has worked with Akuma has said that he is the worst person to work with in the world. Like, everyone. I don't know anyone that says anything good about him. He seems like a rich kid that doesn't know anything but has money.
Castle as well didn't like him at all. In fact, he would avoid talking to him as much as possible. It was only ever Gad that would talk to Akuma, and even then, that would be in trickles. So this led to Akuma being left out of many of the decisions made at Clovarity, which is concerning considering it's his money they were using. This is perhaps a reflection of the age of all the owners.
That was my first red flag. I just knew it was a bad deal. I could tell from the get-go. And these kids are all 19. Trusting 19-year-olds to be your boss is not a good move.
Below the 3 owners, there would now be 7 other staff, and unfortunately, not all of them were paid properly. The first case is with their social media manager in Lucid. Clovarity would offer him $200 a month, which for context is $300 lower than the market value. Lucid was pretty new to the job and would accept without realizing he was being underpaid. The second case is with their head graphic designer in Travis, who was being paid $250 a month. One day though, without warning, he was told that his pay was going to be cut in half. And this was 2 days before his monthly check was due. He assumed that because of the late notice, he would still get paid $250 for this month of work he had done. However, 2 days later, he would find that they had cut this month's pay in half as well. And it would take Clovarity months before he was reimbursed. But at least he got his money back, because Steven, their marketing director, wouldn't be paid for his entire 5 months at the org, which as you'll see is quite incredible considering how involved he was. All this doesn't look good when both Castle and Gad were receiving $1,000 a month for being the owners. A lot of this happened because of miscommunication between the staff and Castle and Gad, who now both had the weight of the organisation on their shoulders, as well as trying to grapple with college at the exact same time. It created an environment where productivity by the staff and optimism in general was at an all-time low. It was clear that something had to change, and this led to the creation of the board. The board was created with the purpose to properly delegate and communicate everything that went on in Clovarity. It functioned like a weekly board meeting where everybody would hop into a Discord call and discuss what was happening in the org.
I think it was really good. Well, I would say really good as in like me and Castle were always, voicing our opinions in there, or, posting about something. Hey guys, like we're thinking about this, what are your thoughts on it? Whether we got a response back or not, it varied. But me and Castle were pretty good at putting whatever we were doing in those chats so that people were aware and that people could voice their opinions on what we were doing.
And eventually, they would expand it to also include the manager of their Rainbow Six Siege team, which we'll get to in a bit. Interestingly, the head of graphic design in Travis wasn't on this board, which is certainly a bit strange. And one of the very first things they would discuss is who they should get for their first RLCS roster. It's now October 2023, midway through Rocket League's off-season, a time when orgs around the scene are looking for only one thing: a top RLCS team. Clovarity was now one of those orgs, which was finally financially in a position to try get a roster that could make the main event of the RLCS, otherwise known as the Top 16. It was particularly important for Clovarity because their investor in Akuma would only continue to fund the org if they found an RLCS team, and it was important that they would make the main event, as the prize pool, and most importantly the exposure for the brand, rises significantly. Gad and Castle would have a couple of options. The first was a possible OCE team, which had the potential to make the top 4, but ultimately they would ignore this and instead sign a North American team that consisted of Tikarel, Oath and Adam. Oath and Adam had won a big off-season tournament known as the Draw, and their manager in Thomas would promise big things from them.
And he was pretty much gassing them up, trying to get them paid, and was saying how they're going to consistently make main event, they're going to be this amazing team, and they need to get paid this much to this much.
Thomas was asking for a lot of money, and Castle and Gad were a bit unsure at first.
Gad and Castle didn't really know too much in the Rocket League competitive scene, how good they would be. They knew about them, but they didn't know how well they would do.
In fact, they didn't even realize they were completely overpaying their manager in Thomas.
I mean, everyone has agreed when I say it, but I mean, he was pretty overpaid for his job that he was doing.
I think Thomas he oversold what he was when they first signed him. Because I remember when they first got the roster, I was like, why are you paying this guy $1,000 and he's not coaching?
Nowadays, Thomas isn't paid in the exact same role Clovarity had him in, but Castle and Gad wouldn't know any better, and would agree to the price anyway. But midway through the signing, Adam would pull out of the deal. This last minute change rattled Clovarity, and they quickly scrambled to try find a third player. They ended up going with J-Pow, who had teamed with Oath and Adam in the draw event, and they would be signed that very night, and Clovarity now had the main event roster it needed. However, during the first week the team would struggle, losing events it shouldn't have, and having internal issues that were becoming a big problem. At the heart of this was a perceived clash of playstyles between TKRL and Oath.
It was gameplay style. If you look back when Clovarity had Oath, you could definitely see a clash of playstyles between TKRL and Oath.
Both players and the owners became frustrated, and on November 6th the bubble burst, and Oath would leave Clovarity just after 1 week with the org. It was probably the worst possible start for Clovarity, and they would quickly find a replacement in Ajax, along with a sub in Jathan, which both the players and the owners hoped would put them on a positive path. But once again the team would struggle through the off-season tournaments, and in their first RLCS event, things wouldn't go to plan, with the team missing out on the main event and placing all the way down in the top 32.
All the players were pretty frustrated. Even the owners were pretty frustrated at the results. As a team that is supposed to be like a low pro, maybe like mid pro team, honestly, they weren't really placing as that. It was definitely something that the owners, they weren't happy.
Castle in particular would be very annoyed.
So he was pissed, and understandably, because if you look at any pre-season like rankings or whatever, Clovarity were at least all like making like top 32 and stuff like that, but they weren't even doing that.
These results also had a negative effect on the org, particularly some of the staff.
I think the biggest thing that really hurt the most, specifically as a graphic designer, you are constantly making defeat graphics, being defeated, lost. It was definitely hitting on the mental. You want your team to win, but it definitely hits on the mental when you are constantly making these winning graphics and they never get used.
And what made this all worse was that Clovarity was paying huge sums of money for these players for almost zero return. In fact, over the 3 months that they had this team, they would spend over $24,000 on them and only get a $1,000 return. Castle and Gad were really starting to feel the financial burn and would deliberate what to do with the board. And they would tee up between two options. The first would be to get rid of TKRL and Thomas, and the second would be to keep TKRL and just build around him. And it was obvious that they didn't know which option to pick.
Castle comes to me in my DMs saying, hey, did you make this graphic? Of J-Pow and Ajax leaving, said thank you and everything of that sorts. And then he says, okay, never mind. We need this graphic, and it's Thomas and TKRL. And I'm like, what's going on? And he's like, we haven't made a full decision yet. We're making these just in case if something happens. You can tell there was a panic in a sense that they were not organized. You can tell something was not right.
This was because there's a huge amount of risk to changing your roster after just one event. But ultimately, they ended up releasing TKRL and Thomas, and there was a very obvious reason as to why.
It freed up so much more money. Like, because they were overpaying for Thomas, it was just a money move. Like, it just made sense to make that decision. And honestly, I think everyone would have.
And just to make it even more obvious, Castle would put this tweet out. Not that subtle, is it? Their sub in Jathan would be moved to the starting roster alongside Ajax and J-Pow, and going into the second regional, Clovarity was hoping the change would bring a better result. But once again, things wouldn't go to plan.
Then we go into the regional. Did not really do as good as we wanted to in the second regional. And then, from there, they were kind of like, we don't really have the finances to do all this stuff. And then they were just like, we'll probably just have to let you guys go. And then that's basically how everything ended.
Clovarity had made yet another roster change after just one event. Most people in the community were confused, so Clovarity would try clear things up, and in doing so, would make their first big mistake. This was in the form of a transparency statement that addressed the entire situation with their underperforming rosters.
One of our value was to be super transparent. You see other industries like, sports, like, how much everyone's being paid, how much, certain jobs are being paid. And so me and Castle were kind of thinking, why can't we know that with esports? What's the difference?
This was actually received really well at the time. People in the comments would praise them for being open and were actually thankful for their transparency. However, within Clovarity and around the bubble scene, everybody would see right through it.
The way he handled it was kind of basically the polar opposite of what I advised. I had been doing transparency reports with Frost for a couple months at that time, so that's where they got that concept from. They definitely pushed it too far and painted people in some pretty bad light.
This is the statement that they put out. But like Maverick has said, it paints some people in very bad light, particularly the players and managers of these teams. Nowhere is this more obvious than this last line where they exposed that they had been overpaying Thomas while he was at the org. And while this honesty looks great for Clovarity, this seriously hurts Thomas's reputation.
They honestly put a lot in that statement, and I'm not going to say it's like a bad thing. Like, transparency is nice when it comes to orgs, but he did put a lot. And then in the comments was kind of roasting people and saying how, you know, Thomas was X, Y, and Z things, which honestly, that's mainly honestly what started this, like, you know, everyone not really liking Clovarity to begin with.
In fact, the community's positive reaction wasn't really genuine, as this statement was released at a time where Rocket League's developers Infisonics would show no transparency whatsoever, after a controversial decision to remove trading from the game. When people saw Clovarity doing the complete opposite, they instantly saw it as a positive, without really picking up what was going on. In fact, behind the scenes, even more was wrong at Clovarity. As we've just seen, all of the Rocket League community's attention was on Clovarity's RLCS roster, but no one knew that while this was happening, another, even more controversial decision had just been made, and it was worse than anyone expected. Going back to November 4th, 2023, Clovarity would recruit a sponsorship and marketing manager in Steven, who would quickly scout out for possible sponsorships that could make Clovarity money. Because, as you know, Clovarity wasn't getting much of a return from its RLCS roster. In fact, it was spending $10,000 a month and only getting $1,000 in return. They desperately needed a sponsor, and one possibility was from a contact that had helped Steven out in rough times.
From my understanding, they lived close with one another, and their families are also super close, and which is, again, is the representative, helped his family financially when they were in very rough times. So that's how I know that they met.
And this contact was an ambassador for a company known as 7K Metals. So what is 7K Metals? Well, bear with me for a bit while I explain. 7K Metals is a gold and silver trading company based in Idaho Falls. On the surface, it looks like a highly reputable company with highly experienced CEOs, products you can buy, and a membership you can join. However, many have accused the company of being a scam, specifically a pyramid scheme. A pyramid scheme is a business model where the primary way to earn money is by recruiting people into the scheme. For example, one person will recruit some people into the scheme. They will get a payment for doing this. Then those people that they've recruited will recruit even more people, and both them and the person that originally recruited them will get more money. And this grows larger and larger as you go down, and as you can see, it looks a bit like a pyramid. And some people claim that this is extremely similar to 7K's business model.
The 7K partnership is based on individuals or LLCs. One person signs up, they have a membership, they're investing in gold and silver, purchasing their own, bullion and collectibles. They get paid to share it with people, and every person that joins underneath your name, you get given a check to, thank you for helping people get involved with gold and silver.
Now, I should emphasize that a pyramid scheme is actually an illegal business practice, but 7K Metals technically doesn't fall under the banner of a pyramid scheme, and this is because they actually do sell legitimate gold and silver products, even if they're well beyond the market value and extremely hard to sell. These products also make up a very small portion of the company's profits, but it's these products that stop 7K Metals from being a pyramid scheme, and instead it's what we call a multi-level marketing scheme, or an MLM, which importantly isn't illegal. However, many people have accused it of being a scam and fraudulent. This is all purposely very confusing, as you can tell by people's initial reactions to finding out about the company.
No, I didn't know too much about it. I just looked at the org and what it was about. It seemed like it was good, and what they were promoting.
You get a link, how many link clicks you get money, you know what I mean? Like a whole pyramid scheme.
One thing that we noticed very quickly was that 7K is extremely like open. They don't hide things like a lot of companies do.
I mean, MLMs and multi-level marketing and Ponzi schemes are. I come from a business background, so I can flag those pretty quick and identify them. And that brand, it was just obvious that that was the case.
So we felt that they were a very good company to work with, and we didn't see any problems.
It was a stupid company. I don't know why anyone would get into it, to be honest.
Stephen, Gad and Castle would meet up with 7K representatives to try find out more about the company, and there were some different reactions.
Quite honestly, just based off that meeting, I was still unsure about it and I wanted to take, time with it. That isn't my area. I did more of the day-to-day operations for Clovarity. They emphasized that obviously their structure was a pyramid. They kind of like explained to me, I don't really remember the details. They kept emphasizing like, this isn't a pyramid scheme and this is why, and that's all I really remember. Again, this isn't really my area, so I wasn't really like invested. I didn't invest my time into this.
As you can see, both Castle and Gad were pretty clueless when it came to this partnership, and so they would agree to put Stephen in charge of the whole thing.
Well, Gad and Castle decided that I would manage the entire 7K partnership. I met several people, lots of online meetings. I got to meet executives from the company. There was a Houston event that I attended where I got to meet like the North American field director. So I got to meet a lot of people.
After many meetings and discussions, Stephen would come back and present the board with a massive deal. It would involve Clovarity joining the 7K Medals program and recruiting their fans as well as other orgs into the scheme. For example, Castle would suggest the idea of recruiting Limitless into the scheme, as well as their partner company in Regiment GG, which is a big gaming community of US Army veterans. They figured that people in this org would be more likely to invest in the scheme and would make Clovarity more money. In fact, Stephen would say they could possibly make 6-figure sums in the first 6 months, an eye-watering amount of money, which was enough for them to agree to the deal. And on the 22nd of February, they would announce the partnership of 7K Clovarity. Initially, the community and a couple staff in Lucid, Pendy and Travis would be curious about this company they'd never heard of, and after a bit of research, they would find something seriously disturbing. The first thing was what I pointed out earlier with their business structure, which was the first red flag. But when they went deeper, they would discover a certain individual who was an associate with the company, an influencer who has links to a far-right extremist group of QAnon, and would lure many of his followers into the scheme. And unfortunately, it doesn't end there, because one of the followers he would lure in was a 15-year-old girl. And I don't think I need to explain what happens next. The brand being associated with this individual was probably the worst thing for Clovarity, because in the eyes of everyone, Clovarity had just turned a blind eye to what this person had done at 7K Medals. To put it simply, Clovarity was in deep, deep trouble.
I'm not a very panicky person, but I understood that the situation did not look good for us as well as 7K.
Honestly, I just started panicking and immediately I was just like, Steven, like, what did you get us into? We need to like get our name off of this now.
We didn't know what to tell our fans, and a lot of them were feeling personally like just afraid of like, oh my gosh, what are some of these people in this company doing? Like, this doesn't feel safe.
Quickly, Rocket League's biggest news source in Shift would break the news about the partnership. Everybody in the community would realize what Clovarity had done, and in short, they couldn't believe it. Stephen, half panicked, would quickly reach out to 7K Medals to ask if this was true.
I talked to the field director of North America for 7K, and he reassured me, like, they knew about this. This was a big thing several years ago, and that they're still working on getting justice for what happened, and that's just something that doesn't need to be worried about. No one in ownership or staff or members of the community agree with what has happened to any extent, and the company, of course, just stripped him of all of his earnings and him from the program because he is He's dangerous. He's a criminal.
It's important to note that Steven himself is actually a 7K Medals associate. In fact, while at Clovarity, he would reportedly try to convince several staff to invest in the program using quote-unquote Clovarity's money. However, he is most likely right in saying that this individual is not a part of the scheme anymore, even though I would find some sources that suggest otherwise. Whoever's right is not actually that important. What is that the community had already made its verdict. Everybody could agree that this partnership shouldn't happen, and with Clovarity at boiling point, they'd retract the partnership, now with both 7K Medals and the community angry. Clovarity as an org was under fire from every angle. First, the changing of their RLCS roster, the transparency statement, and now this. It was simply the biggest PR disaster imaginable, and unfortunately for Clovarity, it was only going to get worse. Clovarity was in absolute chaos, but just when you thought they were done, yet another controversy would surface. 3 months earlier, Clovarity had been looking to explore other games, largely due to how poorly their Rocket League team was doing. One of the graphic designers in Travis would reach out to a collegiate Rainbow Six Siege team, who were looking for an org to help them get to a LAN in early April. The team and Gad would talk it out and agree to the following.
Yeah, so we decided that we weren't going to take any salary up front, and instead they would just pay for the flights and the accommodation for this LAN that happened in April.
They weren't on any like monthly pay or anything. It was solely that we paid for like lands and whatnot, right?
The team would estimate that the LAN expenses would come to roughly $2,000, an amount that they thought Clovarity could easily do.
You know, if they had the money to pay a top bubble, like top 24, top 16 Rocket League team, I assumed at least they had a decent enough backing to where I could guarantee that, you know, $2,000 for 1 month for 6 months of us representing them, you know, would it be too much?
This was all in exchange for the team representing Clovarity for a 6-month period. The two sides would quickly agree to this, and they would sign a contract the very next day, without knowing what they had really gotten into.
In all honesty, it was probably a deal that was skewed heavily in the team's way. I just kind of view that to Gad and them not doing the proper research. I think if you asked any other org that knows the R6 scene to make this deal, they probably wouldn't have done it, just because Collegiate is so small and underfunded compared to Rocket League.
In fact, if they had done their research, they would have found that the LAN that this team was competing in only had a $1,500 prize pool. So even if they had won the LAN, Clovarity would make almost no money back. Again, yet another example of Clovarity not doing its research. Regardless, the team would have its qualifiers on February 10th, and just like it said, it would qualify for the LAN. In the following week, they let Gad know and would begin researching possible flights and accommodation for the event.
We found an Airbnb, we found the cheapest flights, and then he said, okay, and he basically was implying that I should book them. You know, obviously it would be cheaper to book it now versus book it later. And we basically had everything set up, and he's like, okay, let's just get this done sometime this week.
1 day later, the bombshell in the 7K Medals announcement would drop, and we know what happened there. Their manager could sense the craziness of the situation, and just to be sure, would contact Gad to make sure they could still pay for the LAN.
And I'm like, hey Gad, I know you're getting a lot of shit right now, but are we still going to, like, is this going to affect your ability to fund our LAN? And then he just said, yeah, sorry, we probably can't.
I can't remember exactly what happened, but just with everything that did unfold, we just weren't able to fund a LAN. And if I'm not mistaken, they did tell us that there was going to be a LAN, but it wasn't going to be this like soon. And we agreed to that. Whether or not we put that in the contract, that could be on us. But I know that was voiced to us. And when the LAN kind of came up, it was kind of like sudden for us. And then also in a time where we were just kind of struggling. So things kind of just like snowballed down and led to them leaving.
As you can tell, this account doesn't line up with the DMs that you're seeing right now. These were sent a couple days before the announcement of 7K, and here Gad is indicating that everything is completely fine. You couldn't really say that the LAN just came up and was unexpected, could you? In fact, one of the board members in Lucid would confirm that they knew exactly when the LAN was going to occur.
He was telling them that they would have qualification for a LAN event. I don't remember exactly which time, but it would be happening around April.
This obviously doesn't make any sense, which has led to some people making theories as to why they actually dropped the roster.
there was the funds to do it. Dad could have just not taken the settler for that month. He could have been like, here, we'll uphold your agreement, go to the land. They were not financially hurt by this decision. 7K Metals wasn't paying them up front. They just announced it backfired, and they used that as like a get out of jail free.
I can't confirm exactly if this is true, because Gad was quite hazy when asked about it, and Castle wasn't willing to talk, but I can confirm they're right in saying that Clovarity didn't lose any money out of the 7K Metals deal, and that they did have enough money to fund their LAN at the time. And unfortunately, the team wouldn't be able to fly to the event, an event which they probably would have won, and this ultimately made them leave Clovarity. This, coupled with the two situations going on at the time, was an absolute nightmare for Clovarity. Their staff and players were leaving in droves, the owners and investor were near breaking point, and the community's opinion of them was at an all-time low. This forced Clovarity to exit the spotlight after this, but unfortunately, it wouldn't be for long. During late February and all through March, Clovarity lay dormant, and the future of the company was being questioned by many. Castle at this time was away on a holiday in Europe, which left Gad in charge of Clovarity in the meantime, and he knew he had to make a move if the company was going to survive. So with the first qualifier of the second split coming up, Gad would scout out a close friend of his in Nightya. Knight had played with Gad back when they were both making RLCS runs a couple years earlier. In fact, he had also done volunteer work under Clovarity as a community mod. Knight was looking to sign with Clovarity and planned to team with Lev and Nex, two players he had been scrimming and practicing with a lot. Gad saw this and asked if they would want to join Clovarity. They would quickly start negotiations and would agree to a contract on the 16th of April, and plan to sign it the next day, which was the last day of registration for the RLCS. But the day before Clovarity planned to sign them, Knight would end up going with a completely different team of JD and Extremist, which he had also played with a bit, but nowhere near as much as Lev and Nex. This sudden change was a shock to everyone, in particular Gad.
And so like we had everything ready with Lev and Nex. We had everything situated. And then obviously, you know, Knight chose GD and Exorari, so then we had to do a bit of tweaking to everything because of what they wanted compared to what Lev and Nex was okay with.
The team and Clovarity only had 3 days to negotiate this new contract, a contract which was full of problems. The first was the sheer size of it. Being 38 pages long, it was more akin to a contract a team like G2 or Vitality would sign, not a team that was only pitching to make the top 24. And what made it even harder is that Clovarity hadn't even written it themselves. They'd actually been gifted this by a friend of Gad's who was a lawyer, who had paid over $1,000 for the thing. Gad of course didn't want to waste this gift. However, this contract had some major problems.
The pay was extremely low for what we were looking for.
Like, it went a lot of detail on a lot of things, but it was really vague on what each stuff meant. Like, there were kind of like some slick words.
There were a lot of invasive statements and clauses in the contract.
Changing these clauses is simple enough, but there was a problem.
Quite honestly, I don't really know what goes into a contract and what doesn't, you know, like that's all for the lawyer, and you know, he paid thousands of dollars for these. So I was kind of scared to like change anything about it. Obviously I gave it a read and made sure this wasn't like a scam or anything, but I didn't want to like change anything and I didn't want to create any like loopholes in the contract, if that makes sense.
Gad was clearly out of his depth, which is why he would consult Castle about every single change the team would propose. However, because he was on a holiday, this took forever.
The negotiation process was grueling. We couldn't even really focus on negotiations because of the issues with that contract. Amongst just normal negotiation things like, you know, prize pool cut and pay, we also had to deal with a contract that was not made for a Rocket League team.
3 days would quickly go by, and all of a sudden the team had to play in the qualifier, and they were nowhere near ready to sign the contract. And Clovarity was at risk of losing its team, but they would get lucky.
Because we weren't okay with the contract yet, and because Nightya was like friends with Gad, etc., we offered to represent them out of good faith while we figure out the end contract.
This meant that the team would play in the RLCS quals without actually technically being contracted. It was certainly unorthodox, but both sides were willing. The team would go into the first qualifier and do something that both them and Clovarity had never done before. The team would go on a monstrous lower bracket run to qualify for the main event, which is something no one had predicted, and the players thought the pay in the contract should be raised because of this. Gad was willing to do this, even though he didn't really know if it was possible, and once again they would enter negotiations. So while every other pro team was practicing for the event, Clovarity was still negotiating this contract.
It was very overwhelming, especially because we had RLCS. We were getting ready for RLCS. Negotiations were also affected a lot by that. Riggle was the one who she spent close to 40 to 60 hours just in a 3 to 4 day span looking over every page of that contract.
A week would pass, and a day before they were due to compete in the main event, they finally came to an agreement. Both sides were happy. The team was getting slightly more pay, and Clovarity would be finally able to contract the team. They planned on signing right before the event, but Gad first would make one last call to Castle to make sure he was okay with the deal.
After I came to that agreement, the next morning I called Castle and told him about it, and he wanted to rebuttal that.
They presented us with the old payment they were offering, which was far too low.
He wanted to have them agree to the terms, but don't sign a contract so that they can take any offer that, bettered them financially from another organization. But with that,
asked us to lie for them on Twitter that we were under contract and had a $0 buyout because they didn't want this to affect their rep.
For the PR of the company, that if an organization offered them more money, that they were able to take it and the contract was terminated.
Castle had said that they should have forced us to sign a contract before quals.
He wanted me to send the message, and so I formatted it and sent it.
But the way they worded it seemed like that was their final offer too. They didn't say, hey, we're fine with doing your original offer too. It sounded like they were saying, this is our final offer, take it or leave it.
Reading back, it definitely seems that this is our final offer, when in reality we wanted to pick them up regardless.
We felt that was directly disrespectful because we had chosen to represent them out of good faith.
They got mad, and it's respected. We agreed to something previously, and then obviously we're rebuttaling here.
So because of that blatant disrespect and disregard for what we had done for them, as well as asking us to lie because they couldn't do the deal that they agreed to, we left immediately.
Gad kind of panicked a little bit, and he was trying to get us to say, but we were already done negotiating because it just seemed like they were really untrustworthy with what they were saying.
Clovarity once again had lost its RLCS roster, but this time it was 1,000 times worse, because the very next day, everyone would find that Clovarity had magically disappeared from the RLCS, and a new team in Cold had appeared. People would search for answers, and they would get one when Nightjar announced that they had left the org. Trying to save their PR, Clovarity would release this statement in response, once again using the transparency approach to save face. However, the community wasn't so nice this time round. In fact, it even made things worse. The team would end up being forced to release even more evidence to clarify what had happened, and it exposed everybody to Clovarity's incompetence. The community went nuts and went straight for Clovarity's owners, in particular Castle. To put it simply, it was a slaughter. With everything that had happened, and now this, it would all finally take its toll on the two owners, particularly Castle. And after 2 grueling days of this, they both could finally take no more, and they would agree to part ways and close the org. And just like that, Clovarity was no more. Well, not quite. Clovarity's closure would result in everybody involved parting ways, trying to move on to what they hoped would be better things, and our 2 graduates are now trying to look to the future. Gad has started up his old org in Spate once again, hiring many of the ex-Clovarity staff, and even has an RLCS team that is making consistent main events now, and he's seemingly learnt from Clovarity.
So yeah, I'm going back to my roots at Spate. My intentions are still going to stay the same. I've obviously came off from Clovarity, with the learning experience, and learned a lot from, the mistakes that we made. I plan on, still kicking it at Spate, living on a passion to see where it goes. And I just hope that people see that, see my passion, see my intentions, and hopefully I don't end up like Clovarity.
However, midway through editing this video, there have been reports of Spate allegedly not paying casters for its tournaments. Maybe I spoke too soon. As for Castle, he's seemingly disappeared from esports, blocking everyone and deleting all his social media accounts, and is focusing on his mental health and a real life job he has. It's not uncommon for this to happen in esports. In fact, Castle has done this before. He may not really be Castle, and if he does one day return, he certainly wouldn't use that name. Almost everybody I would talk to couldn't mention a problem they had with Clovarity without mentioning Castle's name. To many, he's the villain of this story. His blazing ambition and fiery emotions that would make much of what he said and did seem ruthless, if not outright malicious. Especially when you compare him to the friendly, everyday guy in GAD. It's not hard to blame him. However, people do forget GAD's role in all of this, his ignorance and lack of knowledge when it came to crucial decisions. Along with Akuma with his immaturity, who didn't even know where his money was going. Steven, the man behind the failure of the 7k medals deal. Lucid, the bystander who was quick to leak stuff he maybe shouldn't have. Clovarity's players, managers and staff, who didn't live up to what they promised. And even the community, who would love and then hate Clovarity when it suited them. Even if all these things are true or not. I think the point is more that Clovarity's downfall is a reflection of its culture, not just one person. For those involved, directly or indirectly, I hope you reflect on that.
This org had so much potential, it could have been so much. And see it to go down the drain in your work too. It's sad, to be honest.
This video I hope has revealed a story that everybody can learn from, whether you're in esports, business, a fan, even just a couple of kids who have graduated from school. Clovarity is a stark reminder that esports, as well as the online world, has its risks, and sometimes you might run out of luck. Thanks for watching.